One Dr. V.
President Shrink Dr. V.
Dr. V. Back to the bone for Dr. V.
You're gonna get sugar and spice and everything life. The juiciest celebrity interviews you have ever heard.
Would you say that, given that we're on this topic now, would you say that being fired helped your career?
Been fired a couple times. So, the first time I got fired, I was 27. I got fired from Goldman Sachs. I sucked at my job. I graduated from Harvard Law School. I started work on August 14th, 1989. So that's 32 short years ago. And I got fired on February 1st, 1991. So it was 18 short months on the job. And I stunk at that job. And it was an investment banking job. It was very boring, by the way. And 2 months after that, the great irony is Goldman Sachs rehired me into a different job. And then they wanted my severance check back. The woman said, hey, you'll never have to tell Dr. V 32 years from now that you got fired, but we'd like the $11,000 check back. And I laughed. I said, I could care less. I'm looking forward to meeting Dr. V in 2021 and telling her I got fired. I could care less because I needed the money. Okay, I didn't have any money at that time. And so I kept the severance check. I moved into a different area. And that was a very positive thing. The firing from the White House and the decision to work for Donald Trump, they were not positive. So I just want to be very clear about that. Is there a silver lining to it? Yes. Am I meeting you? Terrific. Do I have a relationship with Bill Maher and Stephen Colbert now? I do. I was with somebody yesterday who's become a very close friend over the last 4 years. And I said, well, you do know, but for my firing from the White House, you and I would never know each other. So there are silver linings to it. But I'm going to be very candid with your listeners and viewers. It was brutal. It was humiliating. It was humbling. Imagine, General Kelly, who I've become good friends with, he's the one that fired me. He said to me a few weeks ago, it's one of the more famous firings. I said, well, it's not up there with President Truman firing General MacArthur, but it was a pretty famous firing. So it's rough, Dr. V. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but here's what I would say to your viewers and listeners. Big deal. Don't have a millstone of regret that you're carrying on your neck. Take the millstone and put it down, go forward, and, you have a great life, and that's my saying to people. I don't regret it. It happened. I will say this, and I think you'll appreciate this. When I have my pride and my ego in my decision-making, I make really bad decisions. And so my pride and my ego was like, okay, I'm going to go work for the American president. I just built 2 very successful businesses, and I'm now going to have the opportunity as a blue-collar kid to go work for the American president. I'm going to go do that. And my wife was like, yeah, but he's a psychopath. I mean, she probably hates him almost as much as Melania hates him. I mean, my wife, Deirdre, is probably here. You got to let Melania have the top position, I think. She's like the Michael Phelps of Trump hatred. But, my wife's probably like a Ryan Lochte in terms of how much she hates him. And so I didn't listen to her. And when you make decisions based on your pride and your ego, you typically end up in a disaster. And that's what it was. So having said that, we're 4 years out from it. I called him out on a lot of the stuff he was doing. He was a very dangerous guy. And I'm glad he's not president. I'm not saying the current thing is going beautifully. There's some flaws in what we're doing right now. But you know what? There's always going to be flaws in the political system.
I'm so glad that you brought up ego and pride. And I started off by talking about a little bit of our similarities and upbringing, and that you had mentioned in a previous interview that you kind of walked up the economic ladder. So you really got to see a lot of different people along the way. Do you think that going to work for a president, forget about who he is, was a way to not just pride and ego, because we're talking about where it comes from, a way to make your parents proud? Because I feel like so much of that mentality, that immigrant mentality, is our parents take so much pride in us doing well. Like, it's almost like that was my parents' really obsession, and they banged into my head, education, education, education. And I heard it in an interview. Yours were very much the same way. And we end up becoming narcissistic extensions of them. So we end up doing things that maybe aren't so good for us, but we know, like, oh my God, the president asked me to work for him. I could do this. And I was wondering if that plays into where your pride and your ego has come from.
I do think so, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is that because you mentioned the way I grew up, and you probably had, I don't know, it sounds like you had a traditional Italian family as well. So I remember my nonna and my nono and how hard they worked. And you talk about seeing different spectrum of economic situation. In 1971, at the age of 7, it was a day of celebration in my house, and I'll make you laugh. I remember it very well. Why? Well, my mother and her mother were having a washer and dryer delivered into the basement of the house I was growing up in. And so for the first 7 years of my life, my mother and grandmother were taking the clothes to the local laundromat. And now they had a plumber come in, and they were going to hook up a washer and dryer in the basement, and they didn't have to leave the house to do the laundry. And, my kids, I guess the good news for my adult children is that my mother still lives in the house I grew up in. And I guess the good news for them, they get to see that house. Like, Dad, wow, how'd you grow up in this house? And it was a very funny scene where somebody from the BBC, because I went to Harvard, the guy's like, well, there's no way this guy grew up in a blue collar neighborhood, because, in Britain, they have this caste system and you can't get into certain places unless you've got certain heritage and so forth. So they sent a BBC broadcast truck out to the neighborhood I grew up in. And then the journalist said, okay, I guess this guy really did grow up in a blue collar neighborhood. And my mother doesn't want to leave the neighborhood. She's still in the same house. I renovated it, but it's a very small house. And by the way, I grew up in the middle class. I'm not going to say I didn't. I would never dishonor my dad, who worked tirelessly, and tell you or your listeners or viewers that I grew up poor. I did not grow up poor. We had macaroni, we had air conditioning. We went in on Memorial Day. It came out of it could have been 95 degrees on September 30th. It didn't matter. That air conditioner was coming out on Labor Day, okay? It went in on Memorial Day. It didn't matter to my father. And that was fine. And we had a budget, and there was tightness in the house. There was anxiety. I remember when my dad got his wages cut back, Dr. V, I was 11. I was like, okay, I'm going to go get a job. I signed up to be a Newsday paper route paper boy. And I hooked up my bicycle with baskets and a satchel. And I used to go around in the neighborhood and go to all the different apartment buildings and knock on the door and ask the Irish and Italian and Jewish ladies if they would subscribe to Newsday from me. And I built a very large paper route. I was making 11 years old. I was making $40 a week. I gave 25 of it to my parents and put 15 in my pocket. That was the way I grew up. So to then go to Harvard and then build 2 hedge funds and make a little bit of dough, I'm like, okay, I want to give back. I'm going to go work for the American president. Right. And so some of that's narcissism. There's no question that, as you said, extended narcissism, or, you want your parents to live vicariously through your activity.
Right.
Some of that's pride. And some of that, frankly, was just good intention. I thought, hey, there's a lot of people in this society that need help right now. We turned our society, unfortunately, from an economically aspirational society. For many people, it's now economically desperational. And we can fix it, but we don't have the political leadership in place to fix it. And people are more focused on left or right than they are right or wrong. But all of these problems are fixable. It just requires the will and determination and good leadership. But anyway, I thought I was doing. I made a mistake. I got blown out of there quickly. As I told Stephen Colbert, I thought I was going to last longer than a carton of milk in the refrigerator, but I got blown out before the milk and the eggs went bad, doctor.
What needs to happen in order for us to work together? What needs to happen? What do you think needs to happen? How can this change?
Well, unfortunately, we would probably need a crisis. You would probably need a very, very severe crisis. And so we actually had a crisis 20 years ago. We had the 9/11 attack. And the great irony there is we did exactly what Osama bin Laden predicted that we would do. He wrote in 1998, he's going to hit us. He's going to hit us on our own territory, spill our blood, and then it's going to force us to overreact. We're going to go to his land, and we're going to lose blood and treasure in his land, and we're going to kill a lot of people, but a lot of us are going to die, and then we're going to give up. We're going to exhaust ourselves, and we're going to burn through the money in our treasury, and we're going to weaken our empire. He wrote all of that 23 years ago. And we sit here on the eve of the United States withdrawing from Afghanistan and the Taliban now having, in 2 short months, 65% of the Afghani territory. And I went to Afghanistan in 2015. I traveled on a troop support mission. It doesn't make me qualified or an Afghanistan expert, but I do have some understanding of what's going on. And I would tell you that we mishandled this. We could have taken that crisis and said, okay, we got to get our education, our bridges, our roads, our infrastructure. We got to put ourselves in a position for the next century. But we didn't do that. We spent several $1 trillion on those wars. They were wars to nowhere. I'm not exactly sure if they've made anybody safer. My buddies in the intelligence service would say, well, they did on the margin. We haven't had a terrorist attack on our soil, a meaningful one in 20 years. So that's good. But what about our standing in the world? Where are we in the world in terms of the prestige that the United States, in my opinion, deserves? I mean, we are a multi-ethnic nation. We're a nation founded on the principle of self-government. We have a 245-year experiment going on right now. Your family and my family came here looking for opportunity, and you have it here in this country. There's so many great things about the country. I'm just wondering, why we've downshifted into this sort of electoral leadership incompetence, as opposed to brave men and women who would subordinate their own self-interest or even their political survival to making the right decisions.